The day I found the 2003 manual was the day I stopped being a doormat. It was dusty, forgotten in the back of a filing cabinet that hadn't been opened since the Obama administration. Most people would have ignored it. Most people would have continued following the updated procedures that made our VP look good while breaking the backs of employees like me. But I'm not most people, not anymore. When Roger Phillips told me for the third time that week to just stick to the manual, his smug smile never reaching his eyes, something inside me finally snapped. I'd been at Nexus Dynamics for 7 years. 7 years of being passed over for promotion, of watching less qualified men climb the ladder while I kept the place running. That old manual was about to become my secret weapon in a war they didn't even know was coming. My name is Diana Mercer, and this is how I burned the corporate ladder to the ground, and then rebuilt it with my name at the top. I started at Nexus Dynamics bright-eyed and full of hope, fresh out of business school with a degree that had cost me more than my parents' house. The company was expanding rapidly, gobbling up smaller firms and establishing itself as a leader in business software solutions. I was hired as an account manager, told I had executive potential, and promised mentorship that never materialized. The first few years weren't terrible. I worked hard, built relationships with clients, and consistently exceeded my targets. My immediate supervisor, Martha, appreciated my work ethic and attention to detail. When she left for a better opportunity, I thought I was the natural choice to fill her shoes. That's when Roger Phillips entered the picture. Roger was brought in from outside, a fraternity brother of our CEO, with half my experience and twice my confidence. His resume was thin, but his network was thick. Within a week, he'd redecorated Martha's office with his fishing trophies and college memorabilia. Within a month, he'd taken credit for the Johnson account that I'd spent 6 months cultivating, and within a year, he'd systematically dismantled all the processes that had made our department effective. "We need to modernize," he'd announced at his first team meeting, unveiling a new procedure manual that added layers of unnecessary approval processes, all flowing through him. Of course, from now on, we stick to the manual, no exceptions. Those words became his mantra, especially when anyone, usually me, suggested improvements or pointed out inefficiencies. "Stick to the manual, Diana," he'd say with that patronizing smile. "That's why we have procedures." What he meant was, don't think, don't innovate, don't outshine me. So I became invisible. I did exactly what the manual prescribed. No more, no less. My clients noticed the change, but when they complained, Roger blamed team performance issues and further tightened his control. I watched as our department's numbers began to slip. As talented colleagues left for other opportunities, as the atmosphere grew increasingly toxic, I stayed because I was stubborn, because I had rent to pay, and because deep down, I was waiting for something to change. And then I found the 2003 manual. It happened during our office relocation to a more cost-effective space. Translation, smaller, with fewer windows. I was tasked with cleaning out the old filing cabinets, busy work assigned to keep me from client-facing roles where I might actually shine. In the back of a drawer, behind hanging folders filled with long-forgotten expense reports, sat a 3-ring binder with Nexus Dynamics Standard Operating Procedures, 2003, printed on its spine. Curious, I flipped it open. The manual was comprehensive, detailing everything from client acquisition protocols to emergency procedures. But what caught my attention was the section on employee autonomy and decision-making authority. Account managers are empowered to make decisions within their scope of responsibility without additional approval, provided those decisions align with company values and do not exceed specified financial thresholds. I read it again, then checked the front page. The manual had been signed by our founder and current board chairman, William Nexus himself. It had never been officially superseded. Roger's new procedures had simply been implemented without formal ratification by the board. That night, I took the manual home and stayed up until 3 a.m., highlighting relevant sections and making detailed notes. By morning, I had a plan. The next day, I arrived early and went straight to Roger's office. He wasn't in yet, He never arrived before 9:30, but his assistant, Trisha, was already at her desk. "Morning, Trisha. I need to leave these financial projections for Roger before my client meeting." I held up a folder, smiling pleasantly. "Sure, Diana, just leave them on his desk." Once inside his office, I quickly placed my decoy folder on his desk, then carefully positioned the 2003 manual on his bookshelf, sandwiched between his sales leadership books that I knew he'd never actually read. Phase 1 complete. Over the next week, I continued to stick to the manual, but not Roger's manual. I began making decisions according to the 2003 guidelines, resolving client issues directly instead of routing them through Roger's Byzantine approval process. When smaller clients needed contract adjustments, I made them on the spot, citing the authority granted in company procedures. The results were immediate. My clients were happier. Resolutions came faster. And I even managed to upsell several accounts because I could respond to opportunities in real time. Roger noticed after the second week, when the quarterly reports showed my numbers trending sharply upward while the rest of the team remained stagnant. "What's going on with the Westbrook account?" he demanded one morning, appearing suddenly at my cubicle. "They increased their subscription tier without going through proper channels." "I handled it," I said simply. "They needed the additional features immediately, and I was able to process the upgrade according to protocol." "Protocol requires VP approval for any tier changes," he snapped. I feigned confusion. "I followed the procedure manual," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Which procedure manual?" His eyes narrowed. "The company procedure manual," I replied. "The official one. Would you like me to show you?" 20 minutes later, we were sitting in Roger's office, the 2003 manual open between us. His face had progressed through several interesting shades of red as I calmly pointed out the relevant sections. "This is outdated," he sputtered. "We have new procedures now." "Do we?" I asked innocently. I wasn't aware of any officially ratified updates to the company procedures. This manual was signed by Mr. Nexus himself, and as you've always emphasized, we must stick to the manual. I was just following your guidance. My guidance was to follow current procedures. And I have been, I replied, tapping the manual. These are the authorized company procedures. If there's been an official update, I'd be happy to see the documentation showing board approval and the signature of a C-level executive, as required on page 7 of this manual for any procedural changes. Roger's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He knew as well as I did that his modern procedures had never gone through proper channels. They were his personal fiefdom, designed to consolidate his power and take credit for his team's work. "This discussion isn't over," he finally managed, dismissing me with a wave. I didn't wait for the other shoe to drop. That afternoon, I sent an email to our entire department with Roger conspicuously included. "In the interest of ensuring consistent quality service to our clients, I'm attaching the official Nexus Dynamics procedure manual for reference. As Roger has always emphasized, it's important that we all stick to the manual to maintain standards." The attachment was, of course, the 2003 version. By the next morning, the office was buzzing. Several colleagues stopped by my desk to ask questions about the old procedures, which actually gave them more autonomy and required less paperwork than Roger's version. I answered every query helpfully, always careful to emphasize that I was simply following Roger's instruction to adhere to official procedures. Roger called an emergency department meeting for 3 p.m. His face was tight with controlled fury as we all filed into the conference room. "There seems to be some confusion about department procedures," he began, his voice clipped. "I want to clarify that the procedures I implemented last year are the current standard, regardless of what outdated documents might be circulating." Amanda from Client Services raised her hand. "But the old manual was never officially superseded according to company policy. Doesn't that mean it's still technically in effect?" Roger's eye twitched. "That's a technicality. The executive team approved my procedural changes." "Actually," said Brian from Legal, who rarely spoke at these meetings, "company policy requires board-level approval for changes to official procedures along with proper documentation. Without that, the original manual would indeed still be the governing document. The room fell silent. Roger's gaze swept across our faces, lingering with particular venom on mine. "I'll get clarification from upstairs," he finally said, ending the meeting abruptly. That evening, I received a meeting invitation for the following morning. The subject line read, "Procedural Compliance Discussion," and the attendees included Roger, myself, and Kathleen Wilson, our HR director. It was time for Phase 2. I arrived at the meeting 10 minutes early, dressed in my most professional outfit, a leather portfolio containing multiple copies of documents under my arm. Kathleen was already there, reviewing papers with a furrowed brow. "Good morning, Kathleen," I said warmly. We had always gotten along well, bonding over our shared love of mystery novels at company events. "Diana," she nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "This is an unusual situation." "It certainly is," I agreed, taking a seat. "I've brought some documentation that might help clarify things." Roger arrived exactly on time, his usual swagger somewhat diminished. He sat heavily in his chair, not making eye contact with either of us. "Let's get straight to the point." Kathleen began. "Roger has raised concerns about your deliberate use of outdated procedures, Diana, despite his direct instructions to follow current protocols." "I understand his concern," I said calmly. "But I believe there's some confusion about which procedures are actually current and authorized." I opened my portfolio and distributed my first set of documents. This is the 2003 Procedure Manual, signed by William Nexus and officially ratified by the board. According to company policy, any changes to official procedures must be approved at the board level and properly documented. I handed out my second set of papers. I've searched company records extensively and found no documentation of board approval for the procedures Roger implemented last year. According to the company bylaws, which I've also included for reference, this means the 2003 manual remains the official governing document. Roger interrupted, his voice tight. "Those old procedures are inefficient and outdated. My changes streamlined operations." "Did they?" I asked, producing my third set of documents. "These are the department performance metrics for the past 18 months. You can see that after your procedures were implemented, client satisfaction dropped by 17%, resolution times increased by 32%, and employee turnover doubled. However, in the past 3 weeks, since I began following the official 2003 procedures, my personal metrics show significant improvement across all categories." Kathleen looked up sharply. "3 weeks? You've been using the old procedures for 3 weeks?" "Yes," I admitted. After Roger repeatedly instructed me to stick to the manual, I wanted to ensure I was following the officially authorized procedures. Once I confirmed that the 2003 manual had never been properly superseded, I began adhering to it precisely. "And you shared this manual with the entire department?" Roger accused. "I shared the official company procedures, yes. As you've always emphasized, following proper protocol is essential." Kathleen was reviewing the performance metrics, her frown deepening. "These numbers are concerning. Roger, if Diana's results under the old procedures are this much better..." "It's an anomaly," he insisted. "One person for 3 weeks doesn't prove anything." "Perhaps," I conceded. "But wouldn't it be worth investigating, especially since client satisfaction has been a concern in recent quarterly reviews?" Kathleen glanced between us, then gathered the papers. "I need to discuss this with the executive team. In the meantime, Diana, continue using the procedures that have been yielding these results. Roger, we'll need to review your procedural changes and determine the proper path forward." As we left the meeting, Roger grabbed my arm. "You think you're clever," he hissed, "but you've just painted a target on your back." I smiled pleasantly, removing his hand. "I'm just following the manual. Roger, isn't that what you've always wanted?" The next 2 weeks were tense. Roger avoided me entirely, communicating only through terse emails when absolutely necessary. Meanwhile, I continued using the 2003 procedures, and my results continued to improve. several colleagues quietly approached me for advice, and I guided them toward the sections of the old manual that would help them most. Gradually, our department's overall metrics began to tick upward. 3 weeks after my meeting with HR, I received another calendar invitation. This time, the attendees included Roger, Kathleen, and Thomas Blackwell, our Chief Operations Officer. My stomach tightened. But I reminded myself that I had done nothing wrong. Quite the opposite. In fact, the meeting took place in the executive conference room, a space I'd only entered a handful of times in my 7 years with the company. Thomas was already there when I arrived, as was Kathleen. Roger came in last, his usual confidence noticeably dimmed. "Thank you all for coming," Thomas began, his deep voice resonating in the spacious room. "I've asked for this meeting because there are some operational issues in the account management department that require attention." He turned to me. "Diana, Kathleen has shared your findings regarding the procedural discrepancies, as well as your performance metrics since implementing the original protocols. The executive team has reviewed this information with great interest." Roger shifted in his seat. "Sir, if I might explain." Thomas held up a hand. "In a moment, Roger." He turned back to me. "We've conducted a broader analysis of department performance before and after the procedural changes Roger implemented last year. The data supports your individual findings. Efficiency and client satisfaction were indeed higher under the original system." He slid a folder across the table to me. "We've also reviewed your personnel file. 7 years with the company, consistently exceeding targets, excellent client relationships, passed over for promotion 3 times. He glanced pointedly at Roger. "The question is, what should we do about this situation?" Before I could respond, Roger interjected. "My procedures were designed to increase oversight and ensure quality control. If there were implementation issues, we can adjust." "The procedures were never officially approved," Thomas cut in, "and they demonstrably harmed our operational effectiveness. That's not in dispute at this point." He looked directly at Roger. "What concerns me more is that you created a system that centralized authority, increased bureaucracy, and suppressed the contributions of high-performing team members like Diana." Roger's face paled. "That wasn't my intention." "Intent is less relevant than impact," Thomas replied. "And the impact has been negative, both on our business metrics and our talent retention." He turned back to me. "Diana, the executive team would like to offer you a new position. We're creating a role focused on operational excellence and process improvement, reporting directly to me. Your first assignment would be to evaluate all department procedures and recommend updates that balance efficiency with appropriate controls. The position comes with a substantial salary increase and a seat on the management committee." I couldn't hide my surprise. "Thank you, sir. I'd be honored to accept." "Excellent." Thomas nodded, then turned to Roger. "As for you, Roger, we have some decisions to make. Kathleen will meet with you separately to discuss next steps." The meeting concluded shortly after, with Kathleen providing me details about my new role and the transition plan. As we left the conference room, Roger brushed past without a word, his face a mask of barely contained fury. My new position began the following Monday. I was given a proper office, a small team, and clear authority to implement changes. My first order of business was to review and update the company procedures, incorporating the best elements of the 2003 manual while modernizing outdated aspects. Roger was demoted to an individual contributor role and transferred to our satellite office in Omaha. He resigned 2 weeks later. 6 months into my new role, I was invited to present our revamped procedures to the board of directors. As I entered the boardroom, William Nexus himself, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever, rose to greet me. "So you're the one who dug up my old manual," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Been telling Thomas for years we needed someone who understood the original vision. Sometimes you have to look backward to move forward." "That's exactly right, sir," I replied. "Sometimes the answers have been there all along, just gathering dust in a filing cabinet." As I presented my findings to the board, outlining how we'd improved efficiency while maintaining necessary controls, I couldn't help but reflect on how differently things might have turned out if I had simply continued to follow Roger's flawed procedures. Any questions? I asked as I concluded my presentation. William Nexus smiled. Just one. Why didn't we promote you years ago? The board chuckled, but there was truth behind the question. Why hadn't they? Because I'd played by their rules until I found better ones. Better late than never, sir, I replied with a smile. 1 year to the day after finding that dusty 2003 manual, I was promoted again, this time to Vice President of Operations. My office now had a window, my name was on the door, and my team had expanded to include oversight of the very department where I'd once been overlooked. The irony wasn't lost on me when, during my first department-wide meeting in my new role, a young account manager raised her hand and asked about procedure flexibility. What if we see a better way to handle something than what's in the manual? She asked. I smiled, remembering Roger's dismissive mantra. The manual is a framework, not a cage, I told her. If you have ideas for improvement, my door is always open. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about changing the game entirely. The 2003 manual still sits on my bookshelf. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapons are the ones your opponents give you themselves. Roger told me to stick to the manual, never imagining I'd find one that would undo everything he'd built. He thought he was clipping my wings, but instead, he handed me the key to my own cage. So if you're stuck in a system designed to hold you back, look deeper. The tools for your liberation might be hidden in plain sight, just waiting for someone brave enough to dust them off and put them to use. And if someone tells you to stick to the manual, make damn sure you're using the right one.